This video will show how to replace axles and bearings for all models of the Bracciano. On the Bracciano, you need to remove the bearings to get at the axle inside. So regardless of which one you're trying to replace, the procedure is the same. There are several methods for installing bearings, including hydraulic presses and mechanical presses, which you might see at the factory, or even a screw press, or your trusty hammer and socket. For this video, we will use the hammer and socket method, as it provides good control to prevent and correct skewing, which can damage the aluminum hub. Regardless of which method you use, the most important thing is that the force goes through the outer race, not the inner race. When tapping the bearing out, you will always have force going through the inner race. This can damage the bearing inside, and we always recommend that you use new bearings anytime you remove them or access the axle inside. So now it's time to do the work. The tools you will need are two 5mm Allen keys and a 6mm for the front wheel, and two 5mm Allen keys and a 10mm for the rear wheel. Additionally, you will need tools for tapping out and replacing the bearing. I like to use a rubber hammer or wooden mallet to remove it, and a metal hammer to tap it in. For the front wheel, the socket which matches the bearings is a 13mm. On the back, you have two different sizes. One of them matches the 17mm, and the other one works well with a 20mm socket. First up, remove the two end caps so you can expose the bearings. Use the 6mm to secure the axle shaft. Now that we have access to the axle, we can use the 6mm and tap out the bearing. Now flip it over and tap out the other side bearing. So now the bearings are out, we can move on to replace them. So now I'm going to use a piece of scrap wood to protect the hub. I'll take the bearing and line up the edges. Then my socket, 13mm. I'm going to use the metal hammer so I get more control. Make sure that the socket is contacting the outer race and gently tap in. I'm using small, gentle taps to get it started so it doesn't come out of alignment. If it does start to come out of alignment, I'll watch for that and I'll correct it. Once it's gotten a little bit deeper, I can use a little more force. Once it is seated home, I can hear a bit of a difference in the pitch. Flip it over. Now I'm going to insert the shaft, and it will actually self-center. And now repeat the process to tap in the other side bearing. I want to visually inspect it to make sure that everything is nice and smooth and aligned. Then I will insert the 6mm again and screw in the end caps. Gently tighten and check that it spins smoothly and that there is no play. It's good. So now on the rear wheel, we're going to remove the end caps and the free body to access the bearings and axle. We start using the two 5mm Allen keys. In this case, the drive side end cap has come off first. So I'll remove the free body. Make sure I don't lose the axle collar. Keep that inside. So now I'll use the 10mm Allen key to secure the axle and remove the non-drive side end cap. I like to tap the axle out through the non-drive side, since it causes less wear and tear on the hub. If you're going to be using a hammer against the axle directly, never use a metal hammer. Always use a rubber or protective hammer like a wooden mallet. And tap out the drive side bearing. So now I'm going to use the 20mm socket like a drift to drive this bearing home. Place that there. Make sure that the contact is with the outer race. Again, I'm going to use a metal hammer. Now I will insert the axle and prepare the last bearing. So we'll have a problem if we try to install the bearing like this. So we'll use the free body to support the hub. So now we're going to use the 17mm socket to drive this bearing home. As before, we'll use the metal hammer and make sure that the socket is properly aligned to the outer race. It is possible to drive the bearing too far. So for this bearing, I like to use a little less force once the drift has passed the top edge. I check to make sure that it spins smoothly, and then I check for any play. I don't see any play, so I think it's good. So now we're ready to put it back together. Take the free hub body. Don't forget the axle collar. Slide that on. Fasten the end cap. Use the 10mm to secure the axle and tighten with the 5mm. And now reassemble the non-drive side. Tighten it up, but not too tight. Make sure it's nice and smooth. That seems pretty good. So it's ready to go on the bike, ready to ride.